Hi, the following podcast is brought to you by Radical Road Brewery, the best craft beer in the heart of Leslieville. Find them at 1177 Queen Street East. That's Radical Road Brewery.
Hi, I'm Brad Merritt. I play bass guitar in the Canadian rock band 5440, and welcome to the music.
Welcome. Brad, it's a pleasure to have you on. I have to take you back to, not my first memory, but it might be my first time seeing you guys live, which was Molson Park, 1988, I think. I know you headlined, I think, the next year. Can we start this off? Can you talk about sort of back then and what shows like that meant to you guys?
Yeah, well, so, and Neil touched on this in the show. The first time we came out to Toronto was 1986. We'd already been a band for 5 years. And so we were kind of a West Coast band that went up and down the West Coast. So getting to Toronto in 86, I guess our first show was at what was called the Diamond Club back then, out of Phoenix. And then that summer we did the one in the round, where
the amphitheater,
Ontario place, yeah. And we went, and then just like you say, I want to say it's probably 88 was our first Edge Fest up there in Barrie.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how many people were there, 35 or 40,000 people. It was overwhelming. We were completely gratified that that we were becoming a national band and not just kind of a West Coast band.
That's fantastic. Yeah, you talked about yesterday about the role Erica M played in really helping you guys get a lot of exposure. But I wanted Brad to just ask you about that drive to your first gig 42 years ago yesterday.
Yeah.
You guys are listening to the radio. John Lennon has just been shot. And you're playing literally your first gig. Obviously, you have no clue that 42 years from now, you'll be packing out the Horseshoe for 3 nights straight. But are you guys excited that you're going to be playing? Like, what's going through your minds?
Oh yeah. So we both were Neil and I and our drummer at the time. We were we got quite serious very quickly. Kind of in November of 1980, we started kind of rehearsing. I learned some songs that he wrote, and then I was creating songs as well, and then we did a couple of cover songs. You probably might recall the song "Slave to My Dick" by kind of like a Peter Gunn bass line, Yeah, so Monday was kind of an open mic night, where they kind of host this thing, and so people come up and sing songs or whatever. And I guess Neil asked David if we could just sort of plug into their gear, and if our drummer could use their kit, and we're going to show up and play 4 songs, right? So that was the plan. So it was late. I'm going to say it was like 9 o'clock or 9:30. I jumped into my truck through the bass in the back and head into the show, and then turn on the radio and find out that John Lennon had been shot. It was an emotional day for us. He was he's like he was the center of our musical universe. So it was tough, So obviously getting there and talking with David and other musicians were hanging around there. Not that we were kind of musicians at the time, but we wanted to be. We were all. The whole evening was quite subdued. So yeah, I mean, so it was a mixed thing, obviously being excited to play, but yeah, we reflect on this often. And yeah, it's hard to put it in its proper context. I mean, it's think about, listen, one of the things that about every day is the Beatles. It's just, I can't help it pops into your head, or a solo effort by one of the members, or a quote by John Lennon, or some sort of funny quip, or whatever it is, a scene from one of the movies. So yeah, it was a watershed moment in the history of popular music. It's something that we took to heart, and we wanted to continue on the legacy of John Lennon. I mean, to the best of our ability.
Yeah, makes sense. And of course, we all know it was an overnight success for you guys. I'm kidding, of course. I'm kidding, of course. I've heard you talk about it. Can you tell us sort of that road? Because it's not an overnight success from that gig to your first major label release.
Yeah. So, yes. Yeah, that's one of the best parts of the whole band, as far as I've been, which is like the formative years. When you're naive, you have energy and confidence and ability, but you're curious and you're anxious to learn and you're anxious to get better at what you do. And so very early on, I got a van. My father helped me with the bank loan, and co-signed all that, and so we took some risks, and Neil and I were from the very beginning, were serious and committed, and so a lot of that just involved trying to get gigs around Vancouver, and then we got this great connection down in Seattle and started playing Seattle more than we started playing in Vancouver. Getting across the border was a little bit easier back then, but eventually we started having trouble, so we had to rely on my father to actually sneak our gear across the border in the van. He had a little more gravitas rather than a 21-year-old. And we'd drive his car across and then switch, and then away we'd go. And then we started playing shows in Portland, especially San Francisco, and made some friends down there, started going down there. By 1982, we were kind of a band that could play San Francisco. We opened up for Public Image Limited, Johnny Lydon's band, in 82, at 3,000 people. Once again, it's still, like I say, naive and learning what it is that and then 84, we got down to Los Angeles. We'd released a couple of independent records, get traction in college charts. Record companies were coming out to our shows. Our song Sound of Truth was on a Sub Pop compilation. That was a Seattle record company, and so yeah, things are starting to happen for us. And once again, it's all on the western side of the Rocky Mountains, right? So and then a few forays actually into Alberta, about the same time. And so then eventually we get signed to Warner Brothers in Burbank, California, in 1986. Then we get a release on a major label, and a proper release in Canada, and started coming to Toronto, points further east, Montreal, Ottawa, and then of course we're just doing the whole North American circuit for several years, so which was very, very intense. But so like I say, it's the formative years were something that they formed us.
Yeah.
What was when Neil was talking yesterday about not getting airplay in Canadian rock stations? I can't remember if he said Canadian rock stations or if he meant out in Toronto, especially out east of where you guys were at. What was up with that? Was there any reason, or did you just need someone like an Eric or whoever it was to finally start spinning your tunes?
Yeah. So, there was a big consolidation within radio. We used to have all these little independent radio stations, and then essentially they became these big conglomerates. And so, and quite often their playlists are controlled centrally, and they're very conservative. They're trying to sell advertising. So, it's not about, it's far past, Alan Freed and the start of rock and roll, right? So it's very corporate. And the coolest radio station in the country was Much Music. I mean, they were the ones that had these, the Wedge and these programs of independent music. And they already played, one of the video that we did from our independent record. The song's called What to Do Now. Album Set the Fire. So they were familiar with us. So when our record came out on Warner Brothers and Baby Ran was the single and the video, it got spotty play, light and medium rotation on some stations in Canada, but Much Music played the shit out of it. And so did MTV, actually, in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a great video. Tamara Davis directed it. She went on to do feature films and all sorts of stuff. And so it really launched us. I mean, I don't know if we'd be here without Much Music. And it was such a, it was the zeitgeist. It was in and of itself. Separate from everything that it created or brought to the forefront. It was something unto itself that people would pay attention to, and we're grateful for that.
So music today has changed in not just what people are listening to or how they're listening to it. You talk about the importance for your band of a channel like Much Music. Today, my goodness, you've got, things like Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Music, streaming, and many artists have gone on social media or opined about, how many streams they need to get to be able to go to Starbucks, for example. Obviously, you guys have been in the business for a while. You were fortunate enough to come up at a time where, yes, it was touring, but there was actually money to be made from selling albums and whatnot. Do you and Neil in the band ever talk about, the streaming of today and as you're making new music, what that means in terms of how you write or what you write?
No, that's to that. Yeah, you're right though. We've been around. When we started, we would organize a recording studio. We were kind of versed in this a little bit because, we just knew people that were kind of, interested in what we were doing, and they were kind of helpful, and we worked together at the time. But then after that, you had to, get it mastered, and then you had to get it manufactured. You had to do all the artwork and put it all together. And there's companies, one here in Toronto that pressed a couple thousand copies of Set the Fire. So then we'd get them all back in boxes, off a truck, and then we would have to distribute them, to distributors. So like City Hall and other ones down in the United States, and then we sent it to this pool of college radio stations so that they all had their own copy, their little play copy, and that's the way it was. And of course, now, as you know, you guys could come up with something. You could actually do it with AI. You wouldn't have to do it yourself, and you could call it something, and you could have it out on Spotify tomorrow. So the way music's made is kind of similar, although we're in a digital kind of thing, but the way it's distributed is completely different. It's accessible to everybody. And Neil and I have had existential conversations, like when the whole Napster thing came and file sharing, and every person in every record company that we knew was, getting walked out the door. And the whole industry just kind of collapsed. We felt that we were in a good position to sort of keep on going and sort of figure this out. But we have, we make a living at this. It's not like, so it's, I don't want to feel sorry for us. Everything's going to be fine. But yeah, we get reports from Spotify and Apple Music every month, and we get, hundreds of thousands of play on a variety of songs, a bunch of songs. And it doesn't amount to much financially. But, having our music out there, having, millions and millions of streams on probably, 20 songs that we do. It makes people appreciate the music, or it gives them the opportunity to do that. And then they might kind of come out and see us play. Right. So, and that's almost the only way you can make money in the music business right now, is actually playing live.
Yeah. And it's interesting because to see that change from the time you guys started, when it was cassettes, through to, streaming today. One of the sort of periods in there that I was wanting to ask you about, it was almost like you guys had to, maybe I'm paraphrasing this incorrectly, but you sort of had to go to the US to come back to Canada, and the success you had. Whereas, I remember, and again, I was a musician at the time, 91, Sloan getting signed to Geffen, and all of a sudden we were like, Canadians can do this and do this big. Again, we all know how that went, but it was an exciting time. Can you talk about sort of that time, and so from a Canadian musician perspective, and what was changing around then, sort of that early 90s?
Yeah. Well, we were without a record deal at the time. So we did 3 records with Warner Brothers, the Green record, and then we did Show Me, and then we did Fight for Love. And then, so there's another time where you could have said, well, we'll pack it in. It was more to do, and we wrote a bunch of songs and hung out and still played shows. And Warner Brothers in Canada, WEA, they put out a greatest hits record, and that was helpful sort of for the transition. Then we signed us to Sony Music Canada on a worldwide deal with them, and did Dear Dear in 1992. So that early 90s kind of thing, yeah, it did feel like anything's possible, right? And that things were rolling, we saw what happened with Sloan. We saw what happened with a band called Copyright. We'd seen, artists like Katie Lang, who went on to, international fame. And she did her own thing, her own way. And so we could identify with that. So, so we were still quite confident. And so then once we did the deal with Sony, we just got right back at it, trying to write the best songs we could, record them the best we possibly could, and put one foot in front of the other. And that's kind of what we still do.
Absolutely.
Gregg and I have been fortunate enough to have so many different guests over the past couple of years. One of the most important guests we've had is Art Bergman.
Oh yeah.
And obviously there must have been some influence, you guys being out west. And I think, you can hear it in some of your music, some of your songs, that there's that sort of punk element there, whether it's some of the lyrics or the playfulness of Neil and the band. I don't know. Can you share maybe his influence, whether it's him or the scene on 5440?
Absolutely huge. They can't. It's and Art in particular too. He at the time he was in my favorite band. They were called the K-Tels, and then K-Tel made them change their name, and they became the Young Canadians. And I loved them, and I loved their songs, and Art especially, I guess I would say. And so huge influence. And whether we started the band or not, I consider myself very fortunate to have been in Vancouver in the late 70s and early 80s. just to see him and see the Young Canadians and see GOA and the Subhumans and the Dish Rags. I'm wearing my Dish Rag shirt here right now. And piles of other bands too, and it was absolutely, it influenced us. It still does, it's something that'll always be with us, and we're grateful to have it. It's like the Beatles, here I'm comparing us to the Beatles, where they were, like Little Richard, influenced Paul McCartney, or the skiffle sound influenced, John Lennon's early songwriting records, or how he played, rhythm guitar, or, it's something that, we acknowledge freely and are grateful to have been a part of. And, when we started out, my personal ambition was to get a gig opening up for one of these bands, like the Young Canadians, and play at the Commodore Ballroom and make $150 and have, 1,000 people see us. That would have been, if I could just do that, then I could die happy.
That's funny.
So, in you Commodore, many venues on the West Coast, across Canada, and other places as well. Last night at the Horseshoe, you guys are doing a weekend residency there to help celebrate 75 years of the Horseshoe. What does that venue mean to you as a West Coast band? Is it as important to you guys as it is to us kids out here in Toronto?
I don't think it could be, because, as getting back to the formative years, which seems to be a theme with us, I had no knowledge of it. I probably didn't even hear about it until we were a band for several years. The only time I went to Toronto was as a kid when I was living in Ohio. I came up with my parents. So then we're talking about a time when, there wasn't really mass communication. We barely had satellite technology. So Toronto was a world away, right? And the thing is about Vancouver is that it was extremely isolated, right? You had the border, you had the Rocky Mountains, and so it was its own little incubator that was not influenced much by what was happening anywhere else, right? Other than, possibly, getting, records from England or New York or whatever that influenced the scene. But so Horseshoe is something we came into. So when we started coming to Toronto, we realized very quickly that on nights off, that was the place to go. That was the place where you're going to see a band that you either liked or was up and coming, or so that's kind of when we, came into kind of a knowledge and appreciation for the Horseshoe. Of course, now, as the older we get, the more we appreciate history and things which are older. So, of which the Horseshoe Tavern is one. And so we realize that it's, in an iconic place and an important place in Canadian musical history.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. I think my parents told me that one of their first dates was they went to the Horseshoe, and it wasn't even for music. It was just for dinner at that time, or there was music in the back. But anyway, I guess without the Horseshoe, maybe I wouldn't be here. I don't know. Anyway, one of the things I wanted to ask you about, because I don't know if you guys have talked much about this or not. I didn't come across much. Is around the whole thing of Hootie covering the song and the impact, and sort of like what did that do for you guys? Did it do for you guys? How did it change things for you guys?
Well, I'm just going to watch this goal here. There we go. 1-1. So, first of all, I'll tell you how the whole thing got started with those.
Please.
We were touring in the United States a lot in the late 1980s. I did 3 records down there, and we got a little traction kind of in what I call the Southeastern Conference, the Southeast Conference. which is kind of that, kind of Virginia, down to North Florida, over to Georgia, or to Atlanta kind of thing. And so the Hootie guys were going to University of South Carolina, but two of the guys, Mark and Dean, were from Maryland. So we would come down to and play a club in Washington, D.C. called the 930 Club. And they would come out and play like every single time. And then they're kids, right? And we're not much older. And they would say like, "Oh, we love you guys. We're in a little frat band and we play every single song off the Green record," right? So it was a record which influenced bands like them. I can tell you another story about that, but we'll stick with this one here. And so that's how the whole thing got started. And I guess we were up in Snow Job, up in Banff or whatever, doing a Much Music concert out there in the snow, and below zero temperatures, freezing. And then someone said, "Hey, this band Hootie and the Blowfish, they've covered I Go Blind, and it's the B-side of their first single," right? So, which sells, I don't know how many copies, a few. And then they just take off. That record, that album becomes, that and the Alanis Morissette record were the massive 17, 18 million copies or whatever. And we were lamenting, why didn't they put it on the album? Because we would have, just with mechanical royalties on that, would have been huge for us. We found out it was the last song that was cut from the record. And then they made another record and they didn't put it on that record either. So, but between those records, an executive, I think, from Atlantic had asked for a contribution for this compilation record that he was making for the Friends TV show, for the Friends soundtrack. And so where are we now here? So they get the song. It's on the Friends soundtrack. And even though it was never released as a single, it becomes the de facto fifth or sixth single for those guys. And radio just starts picking up a few stations, and eventually it becomes, a top 10 hit in the United States. Neil and I went down to LA to receive an ASCAP award because it was one of the songs played on American radio, right? And it helped financially. So, it did change my life that way. It's like, I remember, coming back from a rehearsal with Neil, and I was kind of complaining about just finances, which you do a lot when you're in the music business. And I came back and Chris goes, "Oh, there's a SOCAN check for you." That's when it used to come in checks rather than being direct deposited to your bank. And I opened up, and it was a life-changing check amount. It allowed me to pay down some debt, get a natural gas fireplace, and renovate the bathroom.
Wow. Yeah, I remember we were touring with Frozen Ghost back in the day, and our band, and I remember the tour ended quite abruptly, and I think Arnold said he bought back the rights to with Baby, Baby, but anyway, the one that went absolutely massive, but he had just bought it back for the cost of a used car or something, but I bought back all of his royalties. And then when that song exploded in the US, that was the end of our tour. It's like, going in the studio, taking some time off. Okay.
Yeah. So it is. It's a life-changing kind of thing. And it kind of just, we also took it as kind of validation. I remember sitting around in oh God, I wish I could name the name of the deli. What's the deli here? It's a chain. But anyway, we're in Ottawa. And I think I had a copy of Billboard. Remember magazines? And it's like, we knew we were good when we were signed to Warner Brothers in the US. And we knew that we had something. There was an it factor in their songs, and we knew we could make this thing go. And then to see that song go for another band, it was like, yeah, well, it felt good. It really did.
Good for you.
So we love stories, Brad, and so I'm going to ask for two stories to maybe end this off. You talked about, as you were talking about Hootie and the Blowfish, that there were some other bands that were sort of in that orbit of influence of 5440. Was wondering if maybe you could share one of those other bands and if there's a story there.
bands that influenced us.
that you influenced.
Oh yeah, so that's hard to gauge. But yeah, no, I think that's the case. It'd be presumptuous of me to say who we influenced.
Yeah, or maybe I got it wrong there, but you talked about there were some other bands that similar to like Hootie and the Blowfish that would talk about, that they play all your songs and and then you referenced that, there's some other stories around that as well.
Oh yeah. So we our first tour was the first tour. I can't remember. We were on a bus anyway. Yeah, we were on a bus and we finished up the tour on the West Coast. Yeah, opening up for the Bodines. We did a whole sort of Midwestern swing and then up to Seattle and then down the West Coast. We finished at the Whiskey A Go Go in Los Angeles. And then we had the Deadhead in the bus. So everyone's in the bus all the way over to Richmond, Virginia, where we're picking up a tour with Bob Mould, who was in Husker Du. And we did like 7 or 8 shows with him. And so we get there the night before the show, and I think we actually have a hotel room. It was great because I think I remember having a shower. And then we went out and had a bite to eat, and then we went to this club, and this band, kind of a local band, whatever, and watched them. They were really good, doing mostly cover songs, a few originals, whatever. And then we started talking to them, and then say, "You guys a band?" Yeah, and it's like you're 5440. You go. And they're like, "We do I Go Blind," and this is and they're like music school students, right? And so then the next set, they start off their next set with their version of I Go Blind. So yeah, we definitely, something connected with in that area for us. Like we did really well in Atlanta and, Chapel Hill and Virginia. And, it was a really, really cool thing. And then we, even down into Texas a little bit. And I think it was, I don't know what it is, something the way we played worked for that. It's a regional. I don't understand it. I don't pretend to understand it, but it existed.
Hey, if it works, right? So I want to get to this question about lost venues, Brad. You guys have played all over the place. A lot of iconic venues and maybe some venues that don't exist. So I'm curious if you have a story about a lost venue that you've played in the past.
Yes, I do.
Many.
Well, so I don't know if we should name names here, but we always we were ambitious, as I think bands should be, right? They should want to try to reach as many people as possible. They should take what they do seriously. And and we would play venues and, there's whatever it was, a cramped stage, PA's not up to scratch. It's just small or dingy, or you think you should be better or treated better or whatever. And we came up with this kind of list of venues, like that we called it like the no play list. We're not playing here anymore. And we give it to our agent, right? And then what would happen, is of course you do a tour and that would be on it, right? So we actually, came up with this thing where it's like, if you're going to say we will never play that venue again, you can be guaranteed that you're going to play that venue again. You're very careful of what you said and what words you used. So there's a venue called the Bebop Cafe in Regina. Sandy Pena ran it with her family. She managed Andrew Cash, and she came here trying. She's a big wig here in Toronto now, but and she tried to make things work there, and it was great, But the popular or the capacity was like 48 or something like that. And the stage was, I don't think there was a stage. I think you just put a plate on the floor at the end of the room. And it's at the time you go, this is not really much. And then you realize what it means to have somebody like that really wants you to play their place and get a few people out to see you. That's how it all starts. All those kinds of venues, the lost venues, the Wilders in North Bay, Ontario, the Big Bucks in Burlington, downstairs, down in McMaster University, right? Whatever you want to say about these places, Louis Pub at the University of Saskatoon, they're important, right? And they don't the way they did when we were younger, where live music, that was the way we communicated and communed together, as young people. It was a cultural experience. And I was good on either side of that, whether we were playing as a band on the stage or whether I was in the audience seeing another band play. I was just as happy. I think that's a really good thing you're doing, that the lost venues.
Thanks, and well put. I mean, you can go on. We were guests on the other day talking about Call the Office in London. I mean, it just
here you go, cool.
On and on. yeah, absolutely. So one of the questions I'd like to ask before we finish it off, Brad, is what are you listening to lately? What's in your earbuds or your headphones or whatever that people should be checking
out? Lately I've been listening to a lot of old Kinks. So it's like I got to be the most underrated band of all time. I don't know what the hell happened. But so that's where I am right now. I mean, the thing which grabs me right now that's newish is a band called Wet Leg.
Oh, I love Wet Leg. I love that new album. It just goosebumps. It's so good and so. It's new, but it's old sound. Like it's like what they've done with that album is just unbelievable. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but yeah. Sorry.
It's like yeah, right. Their audience is very young, but like say generation. Oh yeah, I get this, right? It's like it's in my wheelhouse. It's got the right attitude. It's got the right pulse, and they know what they're doing. I don't know if it's them, but the thing is, they seem to be like pure creators. And now part of something, the band that they've put together and the people who produce the records. But yeah, beyond the big single, Chase Long, it's there's other really solid songs, right? And it's I would have liked to have seen them. They came through Vancouver, played the Commodore in August, but I was out of town. Otherwise, I would have gone and seen them.
Yeah, great choice,
Brad. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been a pleasure. Again, the show last night at the Horseshoe was just outstanding, just amazing. And you guys had a great band to open up for you, Ferraro. Great up and coming band that Gregg and I have seen a couple of times. Thank you so much for all the music over the past 42 plus years. And thanks for continuing to tour around the country. And thanks for your time today.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, well, having me, I've enjoyed this. It's been better than painless. So
that's what we try for. That's what we strive for.
Nailed it. We'll do it again sometime.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks, Brad. Appreciate your time.
Okay, thanks, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.